All right, welcome to Tuesday mornings, Tuesday morning Pastor's Corner. I am Will Buttermore, teaching elder at Beth Haven Church. I'm going to ask our participants to kind of go around the room here and just introduce yourself. We'll go ahead and begin with with Carl here, and I'll go ahead and just call you out by name, and you go ahead and give yourself an introduction.
I'm Carl Denty of Phoenix, Arizona, retired pastor. I retired in 2022 after 45 years of ministry. Good to be with these young men again.
Thank you. Eric.
Eric Bush, Tulsa, Oklahoma, pastor of Southwood Bible Church. That's it.
Drew.
Drew Freeman, Yukon, Oklahoma, pastor, Trinity Bible Church, Oklahoma City.
Excellent. Jacob?
Jacob Heaton, linebacker, Chafer Theological Seminary. Just kidding. Pastor of Fellowship Bible Church in the Denver area.
Excellent. Paul?
Paul Miles, Executive Director of Grace Abroad Ministries, Kyiv, Ukraine, currently displaced to Oklahoma.
We appreciate you being in the States for a little while, even though it's under bad circumstances. Let's go ahead and go Luther.
Yeah, Luther Smith, assistant teaching elder at Beth Haven Church, same fellowship that Will Buttermore is at.
And Brad.
Brad Maston, pastor of Fort Collins Bible Church.
And I mentioned Brad last because it's his book, that booklet that we're kind of using. He wrote about 10 years ago, and
That's
so
correct.
we're using it as kind of a launching pad for our roundtable discussion. Our discussion for this particular series is going to be on masculinity. I'm going to try to facilitate. I want to try to get as many opinions in as possible, or thoughts, biblical analysis, so that we can, over the next 10 weeks or less or more, or that's the goal, is to try to get as much information out there as possible so that we can address this particular topic with as much fluidity and as much information as possible, so we can give both our youth and our older men some understanding over the cultural and biblical discussion on this topic. All right. So first question that I have here is, how would you define masculinity? How would you define it? Okay. And again, there's no wrong answers. We'll go ahead and start with Jacob right there in my middle, because I'm just looking right at you.
Shoot, I was hoping to gain some wisdom.
Yeah,
before.
yes. I'll start with the young man in the group, actually. I think you're the youngest, aren't you?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to get our definition from Scripture and what God reveals about it. And so with that, my definition is going to be very probably raw and underdeveloped. I'm actually excited for this study just to kind of sharpen this. But definition for biblical masculinity, I would say, is living under the light of what God has revealed concerning our person and our role as a man, a part of being made in the image of God.
Very good. Drew, do you have a definition you'd like to add to that?
That's a pretty good description of masculinity is actually, I think, doing what God called us to do. And, we can look back at Adam and put in the garden, and he was there to protect it and tend it and basically be a shepherd. And, I think that's what it is. It's our culture has attacked it with such a level that men don't know what it means to be men, and they've attacked it by looking at the extremes, and I think looking at the extremes of men being jerks, and the other extreme of them being panty waist, I think is a mistake. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle.
Okay. Eric.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definition of biblical masculinity.
Just masculinity. I would say masculinity. And you could go biblical or you can go cultural. I don't. It's just how would you define masculinity in general? First thing.
I don't think we can get a true definition of masculinity and stay outside the Bible.
True.
Okay, I mean, just point in fact, that's why we're doing this kind of thing. I think as we look through this and develop it, the Bible doesn't give us in a concise one place what masculinity is, but as we look at God's design for man, in a similar fashion, we're made in His image. So I would say one of the main things we've got to look at is a man who can lead others to a place, a godly place that he's going. I think it comes with leadership. It comes with love. It comes with a man's life, being an example. So all those things are involved. It has nothing to do with what's the old adage? A beer in one hand, a cigar in the other, and a remote right in front of you. That's not anything close to that. I believe as we look through the best way that I've looked at men in the Bible is to look at man in the Bible in the various aspects of what they chose wrongly, what they admitted to, and where they led people to. I think that's where I'm at with those things. So,
all right, Carl, like to chime in?
Yeah, I'm not very far away from where Jacob is, because I really think masculinity is set forth for us in the Bible. And from my perspective, it's relatively simple, and that is that we are to live in accordance with the norms, the standards, the truths that God has set forth for us in His Word as men. And I think there are some general things you could say, relative to that. I think a man is responsible. I think a man is a protector. I think a man is a provider. I think a man is a person who is respectful of others. He's a person with integrity. Those things, but primarily, I really look and I liked. I don't know whose this is, yours or
Brad.
I like the questions. I think they're well thought out questions, and I really do think. I think you have a model. I think you can look at the life of Christ as these kind of direct, and from His life, I think you can get some good insight into what God would have us to be as men, which, as Drew says, is radically different from what we're getting from the world. I don't think people today have any clue of what masculinity means. I think they're as confused as they can be. And I think basically in this country, no, that's not true. There's geographical differences, and I think there are geographical differences. I think the way we look at masculinity in this country, but by and large, I think we have lost sight, and I think men have lost sight. I was reading an article. This is dumbfounded, and I this one I knew. 1980, when people graduate from college, it's 1-to-1 ratio, 1 man, 1 woman. Today it's a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 women for every man that graduates. Men have lost their direction. I don't think the average young man, since I'm old, I guess I need to define what I mean by young. But I think when you start looking at men in their 20s to mid-30s today, I think they're absolutely lost as to what's expected of them, what the norm is. And I hope this will be useful to help some of those young men see from a biblical foundation what God calls a man.
Good. Brad, I'd like you to chime in on this one now. So you can give me some of your concepts or thoughts on masculinity, especially in dealing with the impetus to write your book, or did you have a thought in mind in dealing with masculinity and the definition of such?
Yeah, well, one, I just really appreciate everything that has come up. It's not surprising that we'd be all on a very similar page regarding this issue. But I think one of the big kind of challenges in discussing biblical masculinity is that a good man, if we're going to use that term in the most positive, basic term possible, not theologically, a good man, excuse me, is first a good person. right? I mean, there's so much that just so many bad men are just lousy people. They'd be lousy if they were women, right? So the reality that a lot of the things that we talk about, in terms of good biblical masculinity or a positive picture of biblical masculinity, are just really basic characteristics of a person who is walking with Christ, who's growing in Christ, who's becoming the person God designed us to be. So then when we get into the question of masculinity, we're looking at what are those parts or portions of our place and calling as men that differs from biblical femininity. But ultimately, most of the failures in biblical or in masculinity in general are just failures, personal failures. Failures of people, like they're just bad people, much less bad men, right? Because there's abusive men, there's abusive women, there's, as again, weak-willed women and weak-willed men. There's just all those things are all possible. So as we come to this discussion, right, so much of it is just really getting on the right page with Christ and walking with Christ and growing with him to become the person you're meant to be, and then learning what it means to function very specifically in our role as men in this time. So that was really what hit me. What really caused me to write the book was that there was an outflow within Christianity, within the sort of pop Christianity, with a bunch of books that I won't name that were all basically kind of chest beating, grunting, burping, farting masculinity with Christian sprinkles all over it, right? So, and these were catching on like wildfire because men were feeling like they were losing their place or losing something about that. And so the sort of Clint Eastwood, John Wayne masculinity was held up as a sort of picture of what Christian masculinity should be. And even when it was first put forth, I just rebelled against that so extraordinarily, because I wouldn't argue that John Wayne and Clint Eastwood provide positive pictures of masculinity at all. There are certain parts of it that we could break off and say, oh, we like that. We somehow identify with that. We like their courage, or we like their protective nature, whatever it is. But ultimately, right, they're violent, short-tempered. They're not Christ-like pictures. They don't act like Jesus at all. And so that really made me realize that our pictures of masculinity are totally paganized. We just take the pagan pictures of masculinity that come to us all the way down from Greek mythology and our Achilles and our Odysseus, right? Pictures of what a man is. And wrongfully impute that and say that this is what our distinction between man and woman is. And so it's really kind of interesting to me as we come into this new world. It's a different world than I wrote this book into, in that now we've got such interesting discussions surrounding words like toxic masculinity, which I have to say is a lot of what I was shooting against in this book, right? Is trying to rewrite some of these ideas about masculinity as being gruff, unfeeling, unwilling to show love or show sacrifice, the basically the baby that insists on always getting his way or he's going to get violent, right? All of these features, are now under attack, and of course that attack has gone way over rotated. But so now we've got this whole generation, as Carl so well put to the point, of men who are totally emasculated, afraid to show any will whatsoever, afraid to lead, afraid to take risks, afraid to make sacrifices, afraid to get what they want because they think that is somehow not allowed or somehow disallowed because of the cultural pressure upon them. So I think this discussion is needed now more than ever, and I imagine it's going to take us to places that my book never intended or thought would happen, because again, I was mostly reacting to that perversion of modern Christianity that came about in the late 90s with all the, the John Eldredge stuff and all that business.
All right, excellent. And we're going to also welcome in Poochie Jones, who is Poochie. Are you live? You're muted? You're talking. All right, he might just be a fly on the wall for us. All right. Thank you, Brad. Poochie Jones is up in Duluth. He's one of the teaching, teaching deacons at Duluth Bible Church, and we will hopefully have his participation in coming moments as well. Luther, would you like to chime in on the definition, how you would define masculinity, or if there's a concept or a different bridge you'd like to approach?
Yeah, I think everybody's touched on it, and from their different perspectives and angles. I'm just kind of looking at the word itself and kind of breaking down the etymology. Sorry, I'm kind of the English word nerd here. So just the the way that the word is formed, if you have the case ending ity, that's speaking of the quality of a thing or the substance of a thing. And then masculine, I mean, just the root word of it just means male. So the quality of being a male, that's just what the word masculinity means, just in toto. Now, if we add an adjective to that, that tells us what worldview we're going to approach it from, right? So if we're talking about, secular masculinity, you can put that particular worldview into masculinity and how they would define it. I think Brad had stated that very clear, that in terms of our culture today, masculinity is referred to as status, right? What the bigger bag that you have, whether or not you can lift 300 plus pounds, if you look like a Chad, what I'm saying, or a Tyrone, you know what I'm saying? It's all about status, how many Bugattis you have, how many cars you drive, whether or not you own a private jet, that those types of things, you can kind of put that into the situation. I think that not only is that not biblical, I think it's anti. It's against scripture. Then on the other side of the coin, you have what I would call the feminist masculinity, right? Where, a person is only supposed to weigh 60 pounds wet. It's status but of a different type. You know what I'm saying? And neither one of those fit what masculinity is from a biblical standpoint. If we're looking at it scripturally, for one, masculinity has to do with one's biology too. You know what I'm saying? That we have parts that women don't, and that's what makes us masculine. Our chemistry is different from a female. That's what makes us masculine. The way that that we're stronger than women physically. I know that some people don't like that, but that's what it is. That's what makes us masculine. And I would underscore Brad's point that character underscores this particular quality as well. I find it very fascinating too that when it comes to scripture and how we are to conduct ourselves with one another, there really is no difference. You know what I'm saying? We're to honor and love and care and connect with each other, right? We're to protect and love one another. I just find it to be very fascinating. So I think that masculinity, if we're just looking at the word itself, it's speaking of the substance and nature of who we are as men, not just biologically as well, but also, our function and role in society. And I think both cultures, they've got it completely wrong. They've got it backwards because they're not starting from the premise that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So
that's very, I like that. And Carl bowed out, but he's back. All right. So connection problems. Paul, you want to give your kind of thoughts on masculinity, what it is? Echo on
Luther just said everything I wanted to say, but maybe a little bit more eloquently.
Yeah.
Well, whenever I deal with a topic like this, I always try to do more of a linguistic, etymological approach. When you say, what is biblical masculinity? Well, if it ain't in the Strong's Concordance, then we don't need to define it as it is used in the context of Scripture, because it is not used within scriptural context. And so we need to discuss what the idea is that we're trying to describe through biblical lenses.
Yeah, I agree. And I do appreciate
to do that, we can look at examples of, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you kind of broke up there. I thought you were done.
Oh,
no problem. So on those kind of points, Poochie, I introduced you a little bit. If you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself, we just do name, where you are, and kind of your position within ministry. You're muted.
How about that? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. Poochie Jones from Duluth, Minnesota, part of Duluth Bible Church. Deacon, song leader, worship leader, small group leader, teach about 2 or 3 times a month, mostly focusing on second tense. I love talking about how to walk in the newness of life. And so, yeah, that's kind of my role here, and do some
Excellent.
counseling, stuff like that.
Perfect. Do you want to kind of like chime in on this? Do you want to define, or kind of like how would you define masculinity just in general?
I kind of like some of the things that Luther had to say about how it's packaged around the things we do have. So yeah, I think biblical masculinity deals with the character and the role, the assignments of things, stewardship, those things. So yeah, I would say it needs to be, we need to expose how we think incorrectly about it before we probably build what it is biblically, because we have a lot of wrong presuppositions about what it is. But I think it deals with mainly character and those roles that we have.
Excellent. Just to let you know, from this point forward, I wanted to kind of get everyone's kind of thoughts on this. But from this point forward, it's kind of going. I'm just going to ask a question. Whoever wants to answer, feel free to answer. If I want to go ahead and pick on somebody, I'll go ahead and I'll call them out. But basically, it's whoever wants to answer from this point forward. But I'm going to go ahead and start with this question here, because if we're talking about this, it's because there's something out there that has either infiltrated the churches or is on the outskirts of the churches that are starting to influence young men's minds, or even within the women of mothers, families, concepts within our theology books, within the pulpits. So we have to start with kind of like, at times we're responding to situations. We're not always on the forefront. We're not blazing the trail. We're kind of going behind it and kind of trying to fix what was broken. So let's begin with this, just from our cultural concepts and standpoint. Is there toxic masculinity? This has been thrown around for the last, 15 years now, about a toxic masculinity. Is this true? Is this a reality within our culture?
Well, I think I alluded to this before, but just to get the ball rolling, absolutely. Is there toxic femininity? Is there toxic humanity? I mean, if we're talking about toxic as being destructive or hurtful, we can't argue that there's not, right? Abusive. I mean, that sort of rape culture, the abundance of pornography in this world just attests to the fact that there is abusive and toxic masculinity, and it's rampant, right? Certainly, I think it's overplayed and is being used as a tool of the enemy to tear down positive views and pictures and ideas of masculinity. So I'm not suggesting that everyone that uses that phrase is correct or biblically thinking. But I think we have to recognize that anything apart from God, anything apart from growth in Christ, is going to manifest itself as toxic, as destructive, and that includes masculine tendencies and feminine tendencies. So that's how I would put that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, because a lot of people talk about toxic masculinity. What about toxic femininity? There's a lot of things that are that the female norms go to an extreme, and that kind of can destroy families and societies in various different ways as well. Does anyone else want to answer that kind of question? Is there a toxic masculinity? Is it overblown? Is it? Do we understand what it is? If you want to kind of go and say, what is toxic masculinity, we can even start with that question there.
See, the problem with this particular phrase is that it carries with it presuppositions from another perspective. You know what I'm saying? That whenever we talk about toxic masculinity, whether we agree with it or not, we are essentially inviting. I would be convinced we are inviting a worldview that is alternative. That is an alternative or an alternative narrative to the ones that we would particularly promote. I appreciate Brad's statement of toxic humanity. Toxic masculinity and toxic femininity really is just sin. That's really what it is. But again, we're looking at it from a biblical position. Another person who's looking at it from a radical feminist position would have no problems using toxic masculinity, because their presupposition is that women are always the victims, irrespective of what happens, right? Whereas men or masculinity is a concept that has dominated women over, this is kind of the concept of the patriarchy, right? And stuff like that. So, I do agree that that we ought to address these matters, and that we ought to, just like Brad said, to speak out when these things happen, right? But I think that adopting particularly this phrase could be a bit problematic, because it assumes that it assumes the subjective nature of a person and their actions. If I am very passionate about speaking, or if I get very frustrated about a particular thing, and that person has this ideology, they may view me as having toxic masculine traits, when that might not be the case, because they're working from this position.
I agree with that. Absolutely. Jacob, you have your hand.
Yeah, I think Luther, that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to say, is that the difficulty with having any discussion on a topic that kind of is across all social boundaries, like masculinity, femininity, easy for me to say, those sort of things, is that it all comes from a certain place, that is their worldview. And so we can have these discussions and try to educate people on what biblical masculinity is. But, I think what has been discussed already, and I think needs to be emphasized, is it all comes from that source of how do you see the world, and how do you filter information? How do you filter these types of issues? And that is, I think, where the work most needs to be done. And so I say this, I guess, for the benefit of a person who may be listening to this and genuinely wants to know that you're kind of going to be caught in a war between ideas and worldviews as you're thinking about, well, what is a man? You're going to hear this person who's probably more eloquent than I could ever say, and very persuasive in their speech. And you can become convinced that, oh, that must be a man. They have a large following, and a man is a leader. So that person must be the perfect textbook quintessential man. And so I guess that's just something I think that's important to emphasize, is the battle behind the battle is a battle of worldview.
How would you, I'm not define, but what are the characteristics of basically a destructive male attributes? Now, go ahead, Drew.
I can't figure out how to put the little hand up on the window here. I'm still looking for the little. So part of what's called toxic masculinity has all been redefined, which is typical of the way that the liberals, the left, however you're going to call it, that's typical of how they work. Now, is there a toxic masculinity? Yes. Is it applied correctly? Seldom, I think, from those outside of our worldview. But we have to take a look and ask what makes that. And I look at the four major temptations of man, which is fame, fortune, power, and pleasure. And toxic masculinity is one where fame is taken to a self-centered, self-righteous level, where fortune, that I'm masculine because I have all this money, like Luther talked about earlier. Power, I think, is where a lot of it comes to, because, God established authority in the man in the household, but he didn't establish it to be a dictator or an authoritarian. He established it to be a servant. And I think it can be overused. I've seen it overused in multiple countries around the world, where women are no more than servants. I mean, that's all they are. And I saw next to a lake one time in India, there was a woman walking in front of three men. And I thought, what are they doing? This is not right. She was looking for snakes. They put her in the front, so if she got snake bit, they'd know to take another. And that's the type of thing that really is a toxic masculinity, I think. But Christians aren't supposed to be that way. We go back and we got all the fame we need. We're believers in Christ, and all those things are meant for us. So I think it's toxic means deadly. It's going to kill us. And I think men need to step up and be the leaders they're called to be, but be this.
We lost your audio.
You shut your audio off.
We want to lead like Christ, then he was the true servant. He didn't come to be served, but to serve. So that's how I think we're called to lead. And I'll shut up because I can talk for days.
I was online and kind of looking for, like, how does the world kind of define toxic masculinity? And they had kind of three things, or three characteristics, not definition, but suppressing emotion, hardness, or overly hard or thick-skinned, and violence is power. Now, obviously, we could all agree, I think, I don't have to sit there and speak for everyone, but violence is power is obviously something we would all reject. That might makes right, that types of concepts, and whoever is the strongest wins. And we all know that that's an incorrect evaluation of any type of biblical or otherwise of masculinity. But I was kind of curious as to your thoughts on this concept of teaching boys to be men. And a lot of times we use phrases like man up. I mean, I have a 2.5-year-old grandson right now, and I didn't raise boys, I raised girls, which it's kind of strange because I use this type of language even with my daughters, that there's no reason to be overly emotional. There's no reason to be controlled by your emotions. If you're crying over something silly, like, stop it. It's like there is a sense of teaching people to not be driven by your emotions or be overly emotional or make decisions emotionally. But these phrases of manning up or men don't cry, suppressing that emotion concept, has our culture, even in a well-intended concept, not a destructive concept, taken that too far? Is this something that is a problem, or is this kind of one of the things that's kind of taken to an extreme in the kind of the evaluation of the culture?
That's a hard call, Will, because when something tragically happens, somebody's got to get hold of their emotions. I mean, first responders, they need to process their emotions, but they can't do it on the scene. Okay. And I think that's part of the man being the head of the house, manning up. I think that's what it meant. And they can confront difficulties and process it later. Is kind of what I'm seeing there.
I think when it comes to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Brad.
You're far more qualified to talk on this than I am, but at the same time, I think our culture has a very difficult missed relationship between feelings, between our intellect, and between the truth. And so now that we have decided as a culture, maybe from a previous generation that totally denied and kind of stuffed down their feelings, we went through that Sesame Street 1960s generation that then deified the feelings to the point where people wrongfully believe that your feelings are an instrument to delineate or find truth, which we know is absolutely not the case. And so, as Drew so well pointed out, we're looking for a control of our emotions, not being controlled by our emotions, but also being available and in touch with our emotions and be able to recognize, yes, I feel sad, I feel frightened, I feel whatever it is, right? And so, if we're looking for a definition of unhealthy, if maybe we'd like rather than toxic, unhealthy masculinity is shut off to its emotions, right? There is an absolute person, and it's probably in all of our churches, if it's not us, that is so not able to access their emotions and understand and sympathize with or empathize with the emotions of others, that they're not human. They're just robots. They're sad, kind of pathetic shells of humanity because they've cut off from themselves out of fear or insecurity the ability to interact with the fact that they have feelings. They have emotions in a correct relationship with their intellect and their will and the rest of their humanity. So I would say that there is something to be said for that problem. But as has been so well pointed out, our culture has whiplashed so far the other way, expressly because it's so much easier to manipulate a person's emotions than it is to manipulate the truth or their understanding of the facts. So whether this is advertising or government control, right? It's far easier if you've told people to deify their emotions, their fifis, that you can control them, because you can always make someone feel a certain way just by showing them a picture of a dead puppy, right? You're going to make them feel a certain way regardless of the facts. Now, making a person think or reason is a whole different thing. So I think that's the difficult path that we tread, right, in this discussion, is how do we become truly, actualized human beings who, in accordance with God's design of us, are aware of and interact with our emotional state, as well as recognizing that that is not the thing that either separates truth from fiction or sets our direction in life, right? And I think that's a key feature of masculinity, as Drew so well pointed out, that we are meant to be able to separate our emotions from the facts of the situation and do what needs to be done, in spite of the fact that it might cause us to feel a certain way. And I think that's why God put men in charge of a church and families and so on and so forth.
I think when it comes, I'm sorry. I think when it comes to this, there ought to be some nuance within this particular, because this is kind of multi-layered, multifaceted. We're kind of looking at several different things all at once. I think when it comes to emotions and stuff like that, we have to look at the vocation of an individual. Drew, you had mentioned first responders and things like that. I would expect them to not deal so much in their emotions when a crisis hits, because that's what they're trained to do, right? They're trained to put their emotions aside and focus on the task at hand, which is the crisis, right? To deal with that in one sense or another. I think as pastors, as pastors are concerned, I think that there needs to be a tightrope on both sides, that when a person is coming to us to because someone just died, or and it was unexpected, what I'm saying, I think we should weep with them. I think scripture is very clear on that, what I'm saying, and be present with them, rather than just give them the go-to verse, what I'm saying, to encourage them. I think we should cry alongside of them before we encourage them and comfort them. It gives them a space to do that. In terms of being a father and stuff like that, I think it depends on the context, right? If my teenage daughter just got broken up with a boyfriend, right? To me, I'm like, that's just life. I'm saying, it's time to get over it. But for her, that's a devastating thing. You know what I'm saying? And so to be present with her in that and go, honey, I understand this is just what happens. I totally get it. You know what I'm saying? And I just want you to know I really care about, your relationships and your things like that, versus, just going, you know what, don't worry about it. It's cool. Just, a big deal. So I think that in terms of just this particular topic, us being emotional, I think you're right, Brad. Once again, that I think the pendulum has swung both ways, and I think it's just because collectively the culture, again, is not biblical in its thinking. I mean, we see David. David was a strong man. David was a tough guy. David was the man. He was a warrior. But then we see him crying and weeping. Over here, we read Psalms, where he's just, it's like, dude, get a couple of tissues. You know what I'm saying? He's very, very focused in his emotional state, and I think that's because of the perspective that he has, that he serves the God of Israel, and he has wisdom in that regard. So I think there ought to be some nuance when we're talking about this.
Eric?
I want to address something in Brad's book. I guess that's what we're supposed to be using, part of the bouncing point.
Or it's balancing point, we're not just following it directly, but yeah.
Oh, I know that. But I think it's interesting because I'm listening to everybody develop the viewpoint we're trying to follow. And I think we're dealing with a duality going on. We're trying to develop a biblical perspective, but most of us live in different worlds. For instance, Brad says, how do we choose a picture of what true and real masculinity means?
Well, that's the next question.
Well, no, because I sorry, this is the way I'm going. So hang on. So we're dealing with two different factors. We really want to be biblical, but we live in the real world. And if we lived 1,000 years ago, our viewpoints would be entirely different. If we lived in the times of the Bible, our viewpoint would be obviously somewhat different. And just in this, set of 9 guys, I bet you our viewpoints from that question is somewhat different. What is our father like? What was our examples in the sports realm or the theater or whatever it was that was developed from? And I'm going from the solid stuff, not the garbage that's going on today. There was some solid stuff. I mean, we all wanted to walk like or talk like John Wayne. We wanted to hit somebody as hard as Dirk Nowitzki or some Mike Singletary. We wanted to be the guy that everybody would depend on, that would walk away with the trophy and not the little plastic participation thing. So when we look at what we say, what being a man is, I think sometimes we tend to look at who was the king, who won the trophy, who passed the test, instead of looking at what got them there. How did they arrive at that? How did Daniel become Daniel? How did Joseph deal with the wonderful family he was cast into, kind of thing? So I think we're trying to develop a concise answer to this, when it's more of a, how did you develop that? How did you develop the picture you choose as masculinity today versus what you should be developing is the picture of what God's word says, man up kind of thing. And I think that's where I'm kind of looking at the process, not, oh, we're there. Here's a test you could take and you are the man kind of thing. So that's kind of what my thoughts were going on with that. So,
right. Jacob?
I wanted to just briefly touch on emotions because of what Brad and Luther were saying. And I agree. I think society not operating from a biblical worldview is inevitably going to go on this pendulum swing by generation. And I think with that pendulum swing, we, even as Bible-based believers, can get swept up in that. And I've even sensed within our own movement, people being very shut off to emotions. And I don't think that's biblical either. Now, I absolutely agree with the general sentiment that they are a poor tool to make determinations, those sort of things. But being made in the image of God, emotions are a part of that. And I believe that emotions are communicative. They are communicating something. We just don't base everything off of them, but we should consider them. And so I think our role as biblical males needs to first learn this for ourselves. And this goes back to earlier what Brad was saying, but I think with helping a child process emotions, there's at least 3 things I think we should do. Is 1, identify what emotion are you feeling, help them contextualize it, because a child doesn't know, they just feel. And so if we can help them contextualize, okay, why did you feel this way? How did this make you feel? Why is this circumstance happening to you? And then help them to process it biblically. And I think, I've even, as a dad of boys, fallen into some of those, maybe not as healthy. I don't see an issue with just simply saying man up. But at the same time, am I harming my kids by glossing over maybe a legitimate thing that I need to help them process because they don't know how? And so a lot of stimulating thoughts that I had from you guys.
It sounds like some of your kids need to man up right now.
No, I think they are killing each other in the background.
Case in point.
I wanted to piggyback on what you said, Jacob. I counseling individuals over the years, I have learned something that usually, when it comes to men and having them process their emotions, we're not very good at it. As a matter of fact, I would say that out of all of the men that I've counseled, I would say that men in their feeling vocabulary have about three. And and um you know that because we assume that women are to all be emotional and that men aren't. And because of that, because of all of the obligations and the responsibilities that we have as men, I believe some of those obligations I would even submit to you are self-induced. We tend to stuff down those things, so we don't think about feeling words. We don't think about states of being. We don't have time, right, to do that. And I think that, as you mentioned, Jacob, I believe that's part of the issue of why we see this quote unquote toxicity, right? Is because men don't have a place where they can express their emotions. They're told that their emotions are bad. They're told that they're negative. They're told that they're supposed to be stoic all the time. That's unrealistic. And again, I think that comes from, again, an improper perception of how men are supposed to be, right?
I'm curious, Paul, in your travels, obviously in Europe and missionary work, what do you see as the difference in kind of the masculine nature of our culture versus Ukrainian culture, Russian culture? Is it all around the same? Is the destructive nature of men different here than what you saw over there? How would you describe it?
The number one product that America exports is culture. So whatever we have going on here, whatever you see on television here, is going to work its way into other venues around the world, right? Which is something I've always thought is fascinating, even in the United States, right? So you have a pastor who stands and delivers a monologue, which is the weakest form of instruction, and he does so once a week, and then after that, the congregation goes home, and then they can turn on a show like Modern Family and watch as a group of families that are all related all resolve their individual conflicts, and the most functional of which is a homosexual pair, right? Or we go back and we start watching movies, and I mean, goodness, I'm from a generation where masculinity was defined by the movie Fight Club, which is based on a book written by a homosexual, right? So it's fascinating how we're allowing people who are justifying very basic improper relationships between man and woman, redefining it to be man and man, to be the authorities for defining masculinity, right? Whatever is happening in American Hollywood, that's going to happen all over the place. But getting more to the point of how things are looking, particularly in Ukraine, whenever it comes to masculinity, I think a universal a function of man as opposed to woman, as opposed to boy. I kind of see this as quadrants, right? Male or man is male as opposed to female. Man is mature as opposed to immature. It's not a boy. It's not a woman. It's not a girl. A universal function of man, which we should all be able to recognize as it is a divine institution, would be that one man should marry one woman. However, whenever you go around Ukraine, what I'm seeing is that that's not a divine institution that is being upheld. Instead, it is the hookup culture. It's a man and a woman. If they decide to go the one man, one woman route, it is typically going to be outside the bounds of marriage, right? You'll typically have pregnancies and abortions before eventually deciding to tie the knot, if you ever even get around to that. So it really it tears apart the fabric of society. Once you mess up this idea of marriage, you start messing up the idea of family. Now you got boys being raised without a mother, father in a marriage, to the exclusion of everyone else kind of relationship. That messes with a generation of men, right? Then they come up in this, and it just compounds and gets worse and worse and worse. So I'd say that's probably very similar to what y'all are seeing in your congregations around the United States, if I was to guess. So,
yeah, it is a sad state of affairs in which we have to train our young men to not just seek out pleasure, and that hookup culture is definitely within, not only within our culture in America, but it's also infiltrated into the churches, in which it's no longer a shock that we find, pregnancies out of wedlock. It's now like, yeah, it's what we expect almost. And so that is a sad thing. I just to kind of move this along a little bit, we're just about out of time, and I wanted to get beyond just the cultural concept. Obviously, we need to start from somewhere, and obviously next week specifically we'll get into a lot more of the biblical questions and dealing with a masculinity. But I did want to be able to define the problem. Has our cultures throughout the United States, Western world, and throughout the rest of the world defined or identified a problem, or has the problem always existed? And it's like, and the solution's always been there. It's like all of a sudden now we're defining the problem. I think the problem has always been there, even from the earliest stages. Go ahead, Pucci.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the fact that, and I think Eric touched on this word duality. There is the duality from scripture, from Genesis in the garden, that God said is good, but we can make it bad. And that has to be the kind of the filter for gender, roles, all those things. So anything that we could see as good doesn't need to be demonized because it's bad. It needs to be redefined as, well, what was God's original intention of this? And now let's discuss the nuance of the process of doing this. So we've had to do a lot of re-education of terms at our church because people tend to not get things. And so I would say there's this duality, and then there's this need for definition of how do these things look and how do we put them out.
Oh, agreed. Brad?
Genesis 3:16 says, to the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. You shall desire, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. This problem is part of the fall. This has been going on. The battle of the sexes began at the fall. In fact, I'd argue it began at the very beginning when Adam throws Eve under the bus. Rather than taking responsibility, like we would say a man should, and standing up for her, he says, well, it's this woman you put me here. And also putting blame off on God. I mean, it's really not a great beginning for us to set, right? That he who is supposed to care for, protect, look after, and lead by loving and serving, instead uses her as a crash test dummy. No, you go ahead and try the apple first. You go ahead and try the fruit first. And then when nothing happens to her, at least immediate that he could see, he tries it. And then going on forward, right, says, basically throws her under the bus before God. So you've got kind of a background for distrust or mistrust already there. And then built into this curse of God, the sense that there will be this struggle for women to be in control. It's funny, as you think about Geoffrey Chaucer writing, The Wife of Bath's Tale, essentially, even, all the way back then, said what women really want, to spoil the story, what women really want is full and final control. And that's what men really want too, right? I mean, that is part of our sin nature. We don't want to serve. We want to be served. We don't want to subjugate our desires. We want our desires to come first. We want things to go the way we think they should go, right? So in my mind, this is, as Luther so eloquently already put, and many others, this is a sin problem. And while other cultures fall into the more natural gender roles as they happen biologically and then benefit from that, I would look to cultures like Korea and Japan that, without their problems, don't have as many problems currently. Those are just cultures that I'm a little bit more familiar with, because they're operating within what we might call traditional gender roles. Again, with problems as well. I'm not suggesting that these are the be all end all, but their cultures do experience a certain amount of security and peace, and even interestingly, where gender roles are more culturally input and sustained, you have a greater chance of safety walking down the street. Whereas where we have destroyed those ideas of traditional masculinity, just purely culturally, in our world, it's unsafe to walk down many American streets. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but I do think that taking the dignity away from masculinity is degraded many, especially unbelieving people, to the point where they go, well, if that's what it's worth, if that's all it's worth, then I'm going to become a scoundrel. So I think it's always been with us.
Is it? But
well, to that point too, I think you turn to the next chapter and you see it with Cain, you see it with Lamech, as far as, and this goes to what Luther said earlier about the importance of us living under that concept of fear of the Lord. Well, the contrast to that, I think, is depicted in Lamech, who, boasts in killing a man for wounding him, even a young man for hurting me, and then declaring that if Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, Lamech 77-fold. He puts himself on the throne. He puts himself as sovereign, and I think that's a perfect depiction of unbiblical masculinity. Isn't that essentially what it is? Might is right. What I want is what I want, and I will get. Yep. And if that's not your mindset, you're not a man.
Yeah. If you're not wanting control, if you're not wanting power, you're not a man. And obviously, that's where it comes down to it, right? That I think the biggest issue when it comes down to defining masculinity is when we try to define it culturally. I think we can look at biology, as Luther stated earlier, and look at the fact we're built different. We have different hormones, body structure, parts. There is a general concept of how we think differently than women. That's been proven. Okay, so between masculinity and femininity, there are major differences, and so we can look at biology, which a lot of the times people are doing now because they don't want to turn biblically. Culturally, it's a mess. So biology is where they go, but that's a mistake too, because obviously we're not just biological, but we are immaterial. And so this is where, the concept of the biblical structure has to be the basis for how we're going to truly define and answer the questions that people have about what is the responsibilities and the roles for an adult human male. What is that? And how is that different than females? Because when we talk about responsibility, everyone should take responsibility, male or female. When we talk about integrity, everyone should have integrity, male or female. So a lot of times we put onto the males a higher standard than the females when it comes down to responsibility, integrity, hard work, that type of stuff. But what I think we need to get to is the biblical mandates and the biblical examples for what men should take on versus what a female should take on. And not that there won't be crossover, right? But at the same time, there needs to be a proper define. And that's what we're going to get to next week. So we'll get to the second half of chapter 1, but we'll obviously get into chapter 2 and the questions and answers and start to really kind of dig into the concepts of what it does mean biblically to be a man. All right. Carl, you're very, I see you're paying strict attention here, but I want to kind of allow you to kind of chime in here and give us any thoughts on the discussion we've had so far, and kind of give you the last word before we close.
I would just ask you to change some terminology. I do not like the terminology toxic masculinity. I prefer unhealthy masculinity, because I think words have meaning. And there's a strong difference in my mind between toxic and unhealthy.
I agree with you 100%. We use the phrase because that's what's used out there, but I agree from this point forward, I don't use the term toxic masculinity when I talk to people about this. I use There's things that are destructive that males do.
I think
but especially when you, but
I think we do have to, take hold of language and words with people. I don't like the fact, basically, what I have found the church has done, and I'm a little older than most of you guys, but pretty much we conform to the world rather rapidly. We kind of inhale what the world takes, and we just exhale it back out. And particularly with this subject of masculinity, I think we're on much better ground to state that what we're looking for is healthy masculinity, which only can be developed from a biblical perspective. We live toxic. I don't like toxic. We live in a toxic environment. The whole world is toxic. It's toxic because of sin.
Mm-hmm.
And what we prayerfully are looking to, I hope, and I think this is a terrific subject, particularly because of young men today. I think you guys are really taking on a great subject, because young men today need a firm, found biblical foundation upon which to build their lives. They're not going to get it from the world, fellas. They're going to have to get it. I'll start with answer one of the questions from next week. How do you choose what it means for real masculinity? Where do you go? Well, you go to the scripture first. That's the first place I go. Eric somewhat talked about it. I look at my examples. I looked at, from my perspective. Now I'm older, but I looked for older men who had biblical foundation, had a basis of scripture. I looked to their example. I looked to their counsel. I actually looked to the counsel of other men my own age at that time that were biblical. We have to be able to communicate one to another, particularly as men. We're horrible. Women are much better communicators than men. I'll never understand why God made men pastors, since women communicate so much better than we men. We do need to learn to communicate to our young men and to one another why this is such an important issue and where you're going to get your answers. And so they can learn to look to other believers. They can have confidence in other men and learn from them. That's excellent. Kind of my words. I really enjoy listening to you fellas. I'm so nice to be back again. It's just
we're glad you're back. We're very thankful for you. And just to kind of go ahead.
Hold on. Well, I'd like to offer an objection to the topic. Brad, don't you ever diss Sesame Street? I grew up on Sesame Street, bro. The old school classics, man, are great. I'm a Sesame Street kid, man. Don't you ever diss Sesame Street.
Well, I'll always love the count. So
yes.
Although he can only count to 12 for some reason. I don't know what happened. All right. I would like to thank everyone for participating in this Tuesday morning Pastor's Corner into the topic of the masculinity. And for everyone who's been watching this, I appreciate you paying attention. If you have any questions, obviously, hopefully you know at least one of the individuals in this room. And then feel free to contact us for anything that you have questions on this. And there'll be more to come. Thank you all very much, and God bless.